So this is the whole process. As a reminder, this is the whole process, and we're now going to consider, we're going to go on to the next episode, which is about interviews. And this episode is split into two parts: preparing for the interview and actually conducting the interview. So this first part of this episode is exploring about how you prepare for an interview, and the questions that you will ask in the interview. The second part of the episode is describing and explaining how to construct your interview. Even if it's an informal chat, it's really important to have a structure so that you, as the interviewer, understand where you are in the process. So let's take a look at this next episode, which is about interviews. Obviously, the interview or the informal chat is an opportunity for you to get to know the candidates and for the candidates to describe to you what they have to offer for the role that you have described in terms of the tasks that they will be undertaking for you. So the interview questions are split into three categories: general, specific, including skills, knowledge and experience, and competence-based questions. So there are three types of questions that we'll be exploring in this part of the episode. So general interview questions are designed to gather information, general information about your candidate. And it would be something like, I can see that you worked at da-da-da, or I can see that you volunteered with X organization. What did you like best about it? So these general inquiries are about putting the person at ease. And there are specific questions related to the person. Whereas when we go on to the skills, knowledge and previous experience, and certainly the competence-based questions, you would ask the same questions to all candidates. But one of the things that's really important is that you write your questions down before you go into interview. And you refer to them in your interview, whether it's an informal chat or not. So general questions would be things like, in your application, you talked about your hobbies. Tell me a little bit more about them. Are there things that you like doing particularly, and what are they and why? So these are just general questions. They're giving your candidate the opportunity to talk about themselves. And then we'll go on to the specific questions, which will be about their skills, knowledge, previous experience, and competencies. So those are just some examples, and your general questions are where you would start your interview from. And we'll see how those general questions fit into the format of interviews when we go on to look at the actual format of an interview, format of a good structured interview. Notice you're asking questions for information about how they went about a task and how and where the competence-based questions come in later on in the questions. So here we are talking about the competence-based questions. Now you'll remember that when I talked about this originally, I talked about the competencies being the soft skills, the more behavioral things that are a real determinant about whether a person is effective in their volunteering role or not. It may be that someone has got a specific attainment, a skill, but the way they apply it, or their communication skills, their communication competence, it makes it difficult for them to gel in the team. So what's important is that your competencies are very clear. Number one, in your person spec, but the way you ask questions about them, they're very clear to you in terms of what competence you're asking a question about. So this is how you go about constructing a competence-based question. Now, I imagine that for many people, asking a competence-based question is new. So this might be a change in the way that you ask questions in your interviews or informal chats. The reason that a competence-based question is effective is because it helps you to understand what a person has actually done by the way that the question is constructed, which is different to a hypothetical question, which is telling you actually nothing about how a person has gone about a task, and more about how they might imagine that they would, which doesn't give you an indication of how the person would actually be in the role. So when you're putting competence-based questions together, you start with, can you describe a time when? And how did you deal with it or respond to it? So this is just the basic construction of a competence-based question. In the past, how have you gone about? Can you give me some specific examples? So notice the specificity that you're asking here. And the reason that that's important is that it will give you an opportunity to match what the person has said they've done to what you know they will need to do in their role. And one of the additional reasons that a competence-based question is valuable is that it helps you to make a judgment about how much training will be required in their induction. So another way of asking a competence-based question is, when you've worked in a team before, what was the best thing you liked about it? So what that gives you an insight into is what a person values in relation to working in a team. And what you're assessing there is teamwork. So another way of posing the question is, think about an experience that the candidate is likely to have had. What communication skills did you use most? So I'm going to give you a quiz in a short time so that you can start to read the competence-based questions and think yourself, okay, what competences are we assessing here? Can you tell me about a time when you have, how did you go about it, and what was the result? That is a competence-based question because what you're asking is about a specific competence. Can you tell me about a time, your best experience of doing X? Why was it particularly memorable for you? That's another way of asking a competence-based question. And all the questions are constructed in a way to attain information, to assess information about attainment, which is our skills, knowledge, and previous experience, or a competence that you have identified as essential. And you've identified that as essential as part of your person spec. So you can use this way of putting a question together to ask about skills, to ask about application of knowledge and previous experiences, and to ask about specific competencies, the soft skills. So let's look at some examples. Describe a time in which you accepted a responsibility outside your role description. Tell me about a time when you needed to use stress management methods to stay productive. Share an example of a time when you faced a difficult problem at work or while volunteering. What was the situation and what did you do? Tell me about a time when you had to make a decision you knew would be unpopular, either in your personal life or in your work or volunteering situation. Describe a time when you were under a lot of pressure at work or while volunteering. What was the situation and what did you do? Tell me about a mistake you've made. What was the situation and what did you do, either in a personal situation or a work or volunteering situation? And I hope as you've been listening to those, you're thinking to yourself, okay, what sort of thing am I assessing there with that question? What is it that I'm asking for the candidate to give me information about? So here's a little quiz. And just to say, there is a library of competence-based questions in your resource pack. So if putting questions together like this is new to you, there is a starter for 10 in your resource pack. There are questions for several competencies that we hope you would be able to use cut and paste or to customize to your particular volunteering role. So yeah, as I said, here's a little quiz. Can you describe a time when you have needed to make a decision without referring to someone first? And how did you deal with it or respond? What competence do you think we're assessing there? This was decision making. So again, can you describe a time when you have needed to make a decision without referring to someone first? So what we're assessing is the person's capacity to make decisions. In the past, how have you gone about organising your work for the day? Can you give me some specific examples? That's an easy skills-based question. And what we're looking at here is working autonomously. The capacity, the skill to work autonomously, the competence to work autonomously, which is both a hard and a soft skill. When you've worked in a team before, what contribution have you made to enable the team to work well together? Again, that may be an easy one to spot. That's team working. In the past, you said you'd organise meetings. Can you tell me about the best experience of doing that and why it's particularly memorable to you? What we're looking at here are organisational skills, or it could be meeting management if the volunteer would be required to organise meetings and run them. Thinking about an experience that the candidate has already described, thinking about what communication skills did you use most? What we're looking to understand more is the soft skill of communication. And in the past, you said you led a team meeting. Can you tell me about your best experience of doing that and why it's particularly memorable to you? Again, that's leadership, because if they're leading a meeting, then there's a leadership aspect to it. Again, it might refer back to meetings management as well. So those are some ways of asking competence-based questions that you can use in your interview, and they enable you to gather specific role-related information that you've already described in your role description. So what we're seeing here is that there's a link. There's an absolute integral link between your role description, your person specification, and the sorts of questions that you ask at your interview or informal chat. And the last one, can you tell me about a time when you've needed to solve a problem? What was it that was new to you? How did you go about it and what was the result? Again, we're looking at problem solving competence. So, if you're interviewing more than one candidate in a day, please make sure that you leave time in your schedule to write up your notes after the interviews. And please make sure to plan into your day breaks for yourself. Ideally, you should be having breaks about every 90 minutes from a health and well-being perspective. The interview notes that you'll make will be really helpful in you assessing the fit of the candidate for the role. And I'll talk a little bit more about note-taking when we come to the structure of an interview, which we'll come to in the next part of this episode. Read through your CVs again or applications before you have your interview, and make a note of what you highlighted, take a note of what you highlighted in the screening exercise. You'll remember that I said to use a highlighter pen on the applications or CVs. Familiarise yourself with the relevant equal opportunities or equality and diversity and inclusion guidance so that you're sure about the sorts of questions that you're asking. And be prepared. Prepare the place in which you'll do your interview or informal chat. And if they're coming into your office, make sure that it's a private space, whether it's a formal interview where there are more than one of you doing the interview, or an informal chat. Be sure that it's a place where the person will feel comfortable. and prepare yourself. You know, obviously turn your mobile off so that you're not interrupted, and make sure that the space that you offer your candidate is a comfortable and welcoming space. And obviously there is a difference between the prep you'll need to do for face-to-face interviews compared to online interviews. Make sure that if it is an online interview, that you've checked your technology before you start, and that your candidates have had the appropriate links for whichever platform that you're using. So again, this is an opportunity to pause this video and think about the things we've talked about in terms of constructing your interview questions. So Cheryl, what questions might arise that you've come across in terms of putting questions together for an interview?
Well, I think that many organisations would start off with, traditionally, they'd have started off with very general icebreakery type questions. One of which typically is, why would you like to volunteer with us? Is that an okay question to ask? Is that hard skills, soft skills, or is that just a chat?
Well, I think it's a great question because what that hopefully links to is what you put in your advert in terms of your USP. You remember the unique selling point, what the volunteer will get from volunteering with you. Presumably that question links to that. I would say that it's less of an icebreaker question and more of a question to ask during the interview. The icebreaker questions, the general welcoming questions, are questions to put the person at ease. The what do you want to get from working? What do you want to get from volunteering with us? Kind of slightly puts the candidate on their back foot. And again, this is all about style and preference. I understand that. But to just emphasize that the general questions, the welcoming questions, are about that. It might be, if they're coming face to face, if they're coming to face interview with you, did you find it easy to get to us? How far away are you? How far away did you have to come? Those are the sorts of general questions that I would envisage at the welcoming stage. And we're going to talk about how to construct your interview, the stages of your interview, of which there are 4. Welcome is one of them, which obviously is the first. And your welcome part of your interview is to put your candidates at ease. Is that useful?
I think it is, yes. So definitely don't lead with that one.
I would leave that to later on in the interview. Yeah, personally.
The other thing which I was wondering is what's the kind of ideal number of competencies to ask about, and how many of the ones that we've mentioned in our application should we go through? Because you could have an endless list, really. What's an ideal kind of number?
Yeah. Well, I think that it takes us back to the person spec, this, Cheryl, because in the person spec, you will have identified the attainments, which are skills, knowledge, previous experience, and or qualifications, and competencies. So you'll have identified the hard skills and the soft skills in your person spec that you will have mentioned in your advert. So the thing to consider is that the questions that you're asking in your interview relate to what the person has read. So if one of your key attainments is word processing, the ability to use Microsoft Word, if that's one of the main attainments you need someone to have to be successful in the role, so that's a hard skill. if that's on your advert and you don't ask questions about it, you ask questions about something else, then you're not actually assessing what you have decided are important inputs to the volunteers' outputs. So it's really important that your questions that you ask in the interview relate to the skills, knowledge, experience, and qualifications, and the hard skills and the soft skills that you have said that the candidates will need to be effective in the role. Because what's likely to have happened is by the candidate reading your advert, they've already thought about, because they've applied, they've already thought about, oh yeah, I've done that before. I've done that before. So they're already doing their own preparation for their interview. To then ask, you know, a series of questions that don't relate to the things that you've said are important, the skills, knowledge, experience, and soft skills, kind of makes your interview irrelevant. So sort of neutralizes your interview from being effective. So what's important when you're putting your person spec together is that you're very clear about how many competencies are essential. So you remember we talked about essential and desirable. Is to think about the essential competencies, the essential skills, knowledge, previous experience that the candidates would need.
Thank you. That just sort of really brings home the importance of the whole process and the preparation. That's very helpful. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Alexandra.
Yeah, absolutely.
No more questions?